Okay, today we're going to be learning how to rib stitch or create ribbing, like for the edge of hats, turtlenecks, if you make them long enough. We're first going to do the slip stitch ribbing, which is the tightest of them all. So I have chained 10, and then I will chain one more and go back along the top of my chain with slip stitches, and I'm going to mark this first one because sometimes it is very hard to see when you are slip stitch ribbing. So you're just gonna go through the top of the chain, yarn over, pull all the way through with a slip stitch. Top of my chain, yarn over, pull all the way through for a slip stitch. So for ribbing, okay, we've just done our first 10 slip stitches. We're going to chain one at the end. And when you go to turn your ribbing, it's always important that you turn it towards you, okay? Not away from you. So if you reach the end, let's orient ourselves, okay? Bottom, the top, reach the end. We're going to turn towards you, towards your body, and then you're gonna work back along. Hang on a minute, let me loosen up my yarn. Here's your slip stitches, and you're gonna work along the back loop only with another 10 slip stitches. And again, this first one can be hard to see, so I'm going to mark it with a stitch marker. Okay, so we will continue. This can, if you're not paying attention, this can start to look like the top of your ribbing of your last stitch, but if you put a stitch marker in there, it will help orient you to this is actually your top, because see, you can see your last stitch where your marker is. So it's this one, these two, and not those two. That can get really confusing. Okay, back loop only. Slip stitch, and you want to make these loose because this can get pretty tight and bound down and hard to get your crochet hook through. My sister's Boston Terrier is in the background. She's very noisy. Okay, so we've reached the end, and the stitch marker is very, very helpful in helping us figure out what was our last stitch. So you can either take your stitch marker out and work your hook into it. Sometimes I just leave it in there and take it out after so that I still can see it. Okay, so we've reached the end of that row, and again, you can get kind of confused as to where exactly you're working, so those stitch markers are really critical. So chain one, and again, you're going to turn your ribbing towards you, And you're going to work in that very first, not the chain one, but the first stitch in the back loop. Pull all the way through, and before you go on, put a stitch marker there. And continue to work across the rows. As you get further along in your ribbing, it gets less confusing as to where you're working, but I still like to use the stitch markers just to keep myself straight. Then if I'm watching TV and I go a little brain dead, I don't have to rip stuff out and think as much. Okay, there's my first stitch of the next row, and I'm going to put a stitch marker in there. Got that one kind of big. So again, turning the ribbing towards you. First slip stitch, put a marker in. So I'm going to work a few more of these rows so that you can start to see what it looks like. So if you don't want to use stitch markers, don't have stitch markers, this last stitch can kind of get buried and hard to see. So you can always count your stitches to make sure you don't add or drop one, which is so easy to do when you are slip stitch ribbing. So I've got 5, 10. So that's how many I started out with. So I have not added or decreased accidentally. Okay, and so also was going to show you, I've done 9 rows. So each one of these, if you turn it this way, you can see these rows of V's. Those are actually two rows. So you can count them a little bit easier by going 2, 4, 6, 8, and here's my 9th row. Okay, single crochet ribbing. We've got our 10 chains plus 1, and we will work a single crochet stitch into the top of each of our chains. Okay, end of our row, going to chain 1, turn our work towards us, and work into the back loop only, which you can see the V's. This would be front, back. I keep using up my pile of stitch markers. Okay, chain 1, turn, back loop only. I do have these cool little stitch markers. They're a little bit looser. They're a little bit easier to get in and out. These ones are a little stiffer. And I will see if I can find the link to the wavy stitch markers. And the not wavy stitch markers, the stiffer ones, I'll do those too. Okay, not using stitch markers, make sure you count. There's my 10. You probably should count even if you are using stitch markers. Somehow I've managed to drop a stitch even using stitch markers and not counting. Okay, so I'm only going to do 4 of the single, but just like with the slip stitch, you start to see these raised kind of V. Their V's are not quite as pronounced as the slip stitch V's, but these raised bumps here can count as 2 rows. It might be hard to see, but you can 1 or 2, 4. So I have 4 rows. Okay, so here's half double crochet ribbing. I've got my 10 chains, and to start the ribbing, it's probably going to depend on how large your stitches are, or how tight you crochet. Sometimes and also sometimes depends on the yarn. Sometimes I only do a chain 1 on the ends of the ribbing. If it's a little bit tighter yarn, if it's a bigger yarn, I might do 2 chains. Just depends on how you want the ends to look. Okay, so we're going to yarn over, put a half double crochet into the top of my chain, pull all the way through, and yes, I am a very big fan of stitch markers. Okay, we've reached the end, and I am only going to do a chain 1, and again you turn the ribbing towards you, yarn over, half double crochet, yes, this takes up a little more time to put the stitch markers in there, but it has saved me so many times not accidentally dropping a stitch. So again, just like with the slip stitch, we're working into the back loop only. Right here. chain 1, turn, half double crochet into the back loop, move your stitch marker. Sometimes if my ribbings are short, I'll just not hook it all the way because I'm moving it so often. Okay, you can probably already start to see with this half double crochet ribbing, it's much looser than the slip stitch or the single crochet. So 5, 10. Okay, and I'm going to do one more row. So that you can, sorry. So you can see the V's like on the other single crochet and slip stitch. So just like the other ones, you can start to see these kind of raised V's. You can count by twos that way. So 2, 4, I have 4 rows. Okay, double crochet ribbing, and I will do a +2 at the end. So I have my 10 chains and my +2, and then we will double crochet into the top of the chain. These are a little bit easier to see, so you probably wouldn't need a stitch marker, but it's just a good, for me, it's just a good habit to get into, because the times that I haven't is when I've messed up. Okay, end of our 10, chain 2, turn towards you, working into that first stitch. So you can really start to see how much wider, looser this double crochet ribbing is. I'll do 4 rows so that we can get a better view of what it looks like. So with all the ribbings, you can use them to make cuffs. So obviously you might not do, well, this might actually be a nice cuff length for a sweater sleeve. So if you were gonna, or you could do about like half of that too, just rows of it. The slip stitch ribbing I use a lot for turtlenecks. Did I just do a half double crochet? Okay, I will meet you back on the 4th row. Okay, so just like with all the other ones, it produces these raised edges, and you can count those in twos. 1 or 2, 4, keep doing that. Okay, so let me show you kind of the comparison of all of them. I guess I ended up on the, there we go. So here's kind of all 4 of them. So you can see the slip stitch is definitely the tightest and the most elastic, you could call it that, stretchy. And then the single crochet, you know, not quite as dense, not quite as elastic, and so on with the half double crochet and the double crochet. Okay guys, thanks for watching.